My name is Alicia Ross and I'm 34 years old. The family reunion ended at 4:00. By 6:00, my savings account was empty. $54,800, every cent I had spent 6 years saving, transferred while I was still washing dishes in their kitchen. My father slid the receipt across the table like it was nothing. "We raised you," he said. "Every dollar you earn is ours. That's just how family works." My mother smiled the soft, satisfied smile she usually saves for church. "Your sister needed it more. You've always been the strong one. You'll be fine." I looked at both of them and said one word. "Okay." Then I drove home and made a single phone call. They thought they had taken my money. They had no idea what they had just ripped out from under their own lives. By 8:00 the next morning, the smiling stopped. Before I tell you what happened, please take a moment to like and subscribe. But only if you genuinely feel this story. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. I grew up in a house with 2 daughters and only enough attention for one. My sister Meredith is 3 years younger than me, and from the time she could walk, she was the one who needed things. She needed help. She needed rescuing. She needed a second chance and then a third. I was the other kind of child, the kind you don't have to think about. I remember being 9 years old, standing in the kitchen with a report card full of top marks, waiting. My mother took it, glanced at it, and set it on the counter without reading past the first line. "You're my easy one, Alicia," she said, already turning back to Meredith, who had spilled juice down the front of her dress and was crying about it. "I never have to worry about you." I used to think that was a compliment. It took me most of my life to understand what it actually meant. It meant I could be skipped. It meant my needs were optional. It meant that in a family with a limited supply of care, I had been quietly voted off the list and told to smile about it. So I did the thing that overlooked children do. I made myself useful. If I couldn't be the one who needed help, I would be the one who gave it. I thought if I was helpful enough, indispensable enough, they would finally turn around and see me the way they saw her. I want to tell you it worked. It never did. Meredith, meanwhile, learned a different lesson. She learned that being a problem got you love. Every crisis she created pulled the whole family toward her, and I watched it happen for 30 years. When she was 20 and totaled a car she wasn't supposed to be driving, my parents didn't ask her to pay for it. They asked me. "She's your sister," my father said in the voice he used for things that weren't up for discussion. "Family helps family." I was 23, 2 years into my first real job, and I wrote a check I couldn't quite afford. She never said thank you. And what scares me now, looking back, is that I never noticed she didn't. There was a day I think about more than the others, my high school graduation. I'd been chosen for something small, a few words at the podium, my name printed in the program, and I had circled that date for weeks. That same afternoon, Meredith got into a screaming fight with a boyfriend and locked herself in the bathroom. And by the time the crisis was managed and everyone was calm, we were late. And we slipped out of the ceremony before they ever called my name. Nobody said it was a choice. That's the thing about my family. The message was never spoken out loud. It was simply delivered over and over in whose emergencies we rearranged our lives around. I sat in the car afterward in my gown and told myself it didn't matter. I was very, very good at telling myself things didn't matter. That was the belief I carried. The one that quietly ran my life. That being needed was the same thing as being loved. That if I just kept giving, kept absorbing, kept being the strong one day it would be my turn. It took $54,000 to teach me the difference. There's one more thing you need to understand about my family because it comes back later and it changes everything. There was a name we didn't say kindly in our house. My Aunt Lorraine, my father's older sister. Whenever I did something that put myself first, my father had a warning ready. Don't end up like Lorraine, he'd say. She turned her back on all of us. I grew up believing Aunt Lorraine was the cautionary tale. The selfish one. The woman who had a family and simply walked away from it. There was an old photo on the mantel where you could see the edge of someone who had been cut out of the frame, and I always knew, without being told, that it was her. For most of my life, I was terrified of becoming Lorraine. By the end of this story, I would understand that she was the bravest person my family ever produced. There's a spiral notebook I kept in the back of my desk drawer for years. Nobody knew about it. I didn't keep it to collect on anyone. I kept it because writing things down made me feel a little less invisible. Like at least the numbers knew what I was carrying even if no one else did. That notebook is where the truth of my family actually lived, not in the reunions or the birthday cards, in a list, in my own handwriting that got longer every year. Let me tell you what was on it. It started small, the way these things always do. Back in 2016, when I finally had a steady job and a decent phone plan, my father asked me a favor. "Just put us on your plan, it's cheaper," he said. "We'll pay you back." So I added 3 lines, him, my mother, and Meredith. 4 phones, 1 account, 1 name on the bill, mine. They never paid me back. And somehow, over time, I stopped expecting them to. That was the first thread. There were more. In 2019, my father's hours got cut at the warehouse where he'd worked for 2 decades, and my parents couldn't quite make rent anymore. Nobody announced it. My mother just mentioned lightly over a Sunday dinner that things were tight this month. So I started quietly covering the gap, a few $100s transferred every month to keep them in their apartment. Then the electric bill, then the internet. "You're doing so well, sweetheart," my mother told me once, patting my hand. "You won't even miss it." Then, in 2021, Meredith needed a car and her credit was too damaged to get a loan. So the loan went in my name. "It's just your name on the paperwork," she promised. "I'll make every payment, I swear." I still remember signing it. The finance office smelled like burnt coffee, and Meredith squeezed my arm and told me I was the best sister in the world. And for about 10 minutes, I felt like the most important person in her life. That feeling was the real price of the car. The loan was just the paperwork. In 3 years, she made exactly 4 payments. The insurance for that car sat on my policy because it was cheaper to bundle it with mine. Her name, her car, my money, my risk. By this spring, the notebook told a number I had been avoiding for a long time. I sat down one night with a calculator and added up what I was carrying every single month. The phone plan, the car payment, the insurance, the rent I quietly closed the gap on, the utilities, a warehouse membership, a couple of streaming accounts, a dozen little auto pays that all flowed out of my name. $1,900 every month. I had been paying, without ever saying it out loud, for the privilege of belonging to my own family. At the current rate, that was almost $23,000 a year. When I went back through the notebook, year by year, the total since I'd started carrying them crossed $140,000. The $54,000 they eventually took from my savings was honestly the least of what they had been taking. You might wonder how I didn't notice the theft sooner. The answer is simple. The savings account was a place I never looked. It was my emergency fund, the money I told myself I would never touch. And because I never touched it, I never watched it. The only reason I found out as fast as I did was that I'm the kind of careful person who keeps transactional alerts turned on. That habit, it turned out, mattered more than I knew. I make good money. I'm an operations manager for a chain of clinics here in Cincinnati. I keep other people's systems running quietly, so nobody has to think about them. That's my job. And if I'm honest, it was my role in my family, too. A coworker of mine, Renee, asked me a question at lunch once that I couldn't answer. We were sitting in the hospital cafeteria with 2 sad trays of food, and she looked at me and said, "You make good money, Alicia. So why do you live like you don't?" I opened my mouth and nothing came out. I changed the subject, but Renee wasn't wrong and she wasn't finished. A week later, she brought it up again, more gently. "I'm not trying to get in your business," she said. "I just watch you skip lunch to save $6. And I know what you make. Somebody's eating your paycheck, Alicia. I hope it's at least someone who'd do the same for you." I told her it was complicated. She gave me a look I didn't understand then, and I understand completely now. It was the look of someone watching a person defend the exact thing that's hurting them. The question stayed with me for weeks, all the way up to the reunion, sitting in the back of my mind like a light I kept forgetting to turn off. Because the truth was, every thread of my family's life ran back to me, and I was starting to understand something that scared me. Pull one thread, and the whole thing comes down. I just didn't know yet that they were about to pull it. The reunion was my parents' idea, a backyard cookout on the second Saturday in May, folding tables and a cooler of soda and my father's ancient gas grill. I almost didn't notice how strange the day was, because the strangeness came dressed as kindness. My mother met me at the gate and hugged me before I was even through it. "There's my girl," she said. "We're so proud of you, you know that." When we took the group photo, she pulled me into the center, right beside her, which had never once happened in my entire life. My father clapped me on the shoulder and told his brother what a good head I had for money. I remember standing there thinking, dazed, that this was what I had wanted since I was 9 years old, to be the one in the middle of the photo. I should have known better. Warmth in my family was never free. There was one relative who was kind to me the ordinary way, without an angle. My mother's cousin Carol. She found me by the drinks table, squeezed my arm, and said quietly, "You always were the one holding things together, weren't you?" I didn't think much of it then. I filed it away as a nice thing an aunt says. It would come back to matter more than almost anything else. The second strange thing was Meredith, my sister, who had spent our whole lives orbiting me when she wanted something, would not come near me. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Every time I drifted toward her, she found a reason to be somewhere else. When I finally cornered her by the fence and asked if she was okay, she wouldn't look up from her cup. "I'm fine. I have a headache," she said. "Don't worry about me." The one person in that family who always wanted my attention suddenly couldn't stand to be in my orbit. At one point, I caught her watching me from across the yard while I helped my mother carry a tray, and the second our eyes met, she looked away so fast she nearly spilled her drink. I told myself she was just tired. I'm good at explanations that let people off the hook, but some part of me, the part that keeps the notebook, filed it away. People don't avoid you like that unless they're carrying something they don't want you to read on their face. And then there was my father and the thing he said that I didn't understand until it was too late. We were standing near the grill and out of nowhere he brought up my savings. Not fishing for a number the way you'd expect. He already knew the number. "We've watched that little nest egg of yours grow for years, sweetheart," he said, smiling at the coals. "You've done so well. We've watched it grow." I thought it was pride. I know now it was a man admiring something he had already decided to take. The last piece came from the smallest person there. My nephew Dylan, Meredith's boy, is 5 and 5-year-olds don't know which truths they're not supposed to say. He ran up to me with a half-melted popsicle and grinned. "Grandpa said Aunt Alicia's going to help," he told me, delighted with himself. "But it's a secret." I crouched down and smiled at him and told him it was a good secret. Snorts, and my heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. But I'm the one who stays and helps. That's who I've always been. So when the tables emptied and the last of the family drifted out to their cars at 4:00, I didn't leave. I rolled up my sleeves and I stood at my parents' sink washing their dishes because that is what the strong one does. Through the doorway I could see my mother and father bent over a laptop at the dining table, heads close in together, talking low. When I glanced up, they went quiet. My mother closed the screen halfway. I turned back to the sink. My hands were in the warm water. My phone was face down on the counter beside me, and then it buzzed. I dried one hand and turned the phone over, expecting nothing. A banking alert glowed on the screen. Alert. A transfer of $54,800 was made from your emergency savings. For a second, my brain simply refused it. That account didn't move. That account had never moved. It was the one door in my life I had never imagined anyone would open because I had never imagined anyone would want to. I stood there with soap drying on my wrist, reading it again. $54,800 from the account I never touched. While I washed their dishes, I opened the banking app. My thumb wasn't quite steady. The balance loaded and it fit on a single line. 6 snorts years of saving, and it came down to a number small enough to fit in the corner of a screen. I scrolled to the transaction history, and there it was, plain and cold. An internal transfer moved out of my joint savings and into my parents' checking account at the same bank, timed at just before 5:00. Not a wire, not some elaborate scheme, an internal transfer, instant from one account to another under the same roof because my mother's name was on my savings account. It had been there since the fall of 2009 when I was 18 and starting college, and she'd been added so she could move tuition money around. 17 years and no one ever took her name off. I had forgotten the door was even there. She hadn't. They did it in the next room while I dried their plates. I want you to understand what I felt in that moment because it wasn't what I expected. I wasn't crying. I wasn't shaking. Something in me had gone very quiet and very clear. I didn't want an apology. I didn't even want the money, not right then. I wanted to watch them say out loud. I dried my hands. I folded the dish towel and laid it on the counter, the way you do when you're finished with something. And I walked to the table where my parents were sitting in the very kitchen I had just cleaned for them. The receipt was already there waiting on the table, like they'd expected me. My father didn't hide anything. He slid the printout toward me with 2 fingers, calm as a man passing the salt. "You'd have given it to her anyway," he said. "I just saved us the conversation." I looked at the paper. My sister's name wasn't even on it. The money had gone to their checking to be handed down to her the way everything in this family flowed, but I understood exactly what it was. "Say it," I told him, out loud. He didn't hesitate. That's the part I keep coming back to. He tapped the receipt once with his finger and said, "We raised you. Every dollar you earn is ours. That's just how family works." There was no shame in his face. He believed it. That was the thing I finally saw clearly sitting at that table. You cannot argue a person out of a belief that has held their entire life together. And my father had built his whole world on the idea that the strong child owes the rest. My mother reached across and touched my hand gently, the way she used to when I was small. She was smiling that soft church smile. "Your sister needed it more, sweetheart," she said. "You've always been the strong one, you'll be fine." The strong one. That was the moment something inside me closed quietly like a door in an empty house. I stood up. I didn't slam anything. On my way out, Meredith was waiting in the hallway. She hadn't been at the table. This was between me and them, and she knew it. But she stepped in front of me, arms crossed, not quite looking at my face. "I didn't ask them to," she said. "But I'm not giving it back, Alicia." I looked at her for a long moment. "I'm not giving it back." I made sure to remember those exact words. Then I said the only thing I had left to say to any of them. I said it flat and quiet, and I watched all three of them relax when they heard it because they thought it meant the same thing it had always meant. "Okay." I walked out to my car. My parents smiled at each other through the window. They thought okay meant surrender. It had meant that for 30 years. It didn't mean that anymore. The whole drive home, I wasn't angry. I was doing math. I thought about the notebook in my desk drawer. I thought about every thread that ran back to my name, the phone plan, the car, the insurance, the rent, the utilities, all of it, flowing out of me and into them quietly for years, while they told me I was the strong one and let me pay for the privilege. They had reached into the one account I kept for myself and taken it, and they had done it believing there would be no cost. Because there never had been. By the time I pulled into my own driveway, the math was finished and it had turned into a decision. I went inside, sat down at my kitchen table and made a single phone call. I want to be clear about this because people always expect the wrong thing here. I did not call a lawyer. I did not call the police. There was nothing to report. My mother was a legal owner of that account, and what they'd done, as ugly as it was, wasn't a crime a bank would reverse. I called my phone carrier. The number was on the back of the bill I'd been paying for a decade. A tired-sounding representative answered, and I told her I wanted to remove 3 lines from my account. "You're the account owner, ma'am," she said after pulling up my information. "You can remove those lines effective tonight if you'd like. They'll need to set up their own service to keep their numbers." "Effective tonight?" "Yes," I said before I could talk myself out of it. "Tonight." That was the call. One call. But I wasn't done. And everything else I did that night, I did quietly through apps from my own kitchen table with a cup of tea going cold beside me. I opened my insurance app and removed Meredith and her car from my policy. A confirmation came back a moment later. "You have removed a driver from your policy. Changes take effect at cycle close." I logged into the auto loan. I couldn't simply stop paying it and let it default because the loan was in my name, and I was not going to let my sister's choices wreck my credit. So I canceled the automatic payment from my account, and I submitted a request to have the loan refinanced into Meredith's own name. If she wanted the car, she was going to have to qualify for it herself, or give it up. Either way, it was coming off my back. I removed my parents and my sister from the warehouse membership where they were listed under my account. I logged them out of the streaming services and changed the passwords. One by one, I switched off the auto pays for the utilities and the internet and the gap in the rent, each one clicking quietly from on to off. Then I got to the last thread, and I stopped. The rent. The gap I'd been covering so my parents could keep their apartment. My finger hovered over the button. I sat there and thought about them being 64 and 61 and suddenly short. I thought about how frightening that would be. For 30 years, in a moment exactly like this one, I had always chosen them over me. Then I heard my mother's voice again. "You've always been the strong one. You'll be fine." Just once I chose me. I canceled it. The screen said simply, "Auto pay canceled." Before I went to bed, I opened the drawer where I keep things that matter, and I found a folded funeral program from a few years back. On the back, in careful handwriting, was a phone number and a single line. "If it ever gets bad, call me." My Aunt Lorraine had pressed it into my hand at a great-uncle's service years ago, and I had kept it without ever quite knowing why. I remembered the day she gave it to me. We were standing outside the church after the service, and Lorraine had appeared at my elbow the way she always did at the edges of family events. Welcome enough to attend, never quite invited in. She folded the program into my hand and closed my fingers around it. "You've got the look," she'd said quietly, so no one else could hear. "The one where you're already exhausted and you're still saying yes." I'd laughed it off at the time, but I'd kept her number for years in the drawer with the things that mattered, and that told me something I hadn't wanted to know. I didn't call her that night, but I set the program on my nightstand where I could see it. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I slept the whole night through. I slept better than I had in a long time, and that honestly scared me a little. They woke up at 8:00 the next morning. That's when it started. My father reached for his phone first, the way people do, and the screen said, "No service, SOS only." He tried again, restarted it, took the case off, did all the useless things. Nothing. He tried to call my mother's phone from across the house, and hers was dark, too. And Meredith's. 3 phones, all under my account, all removed at cycle close, exactly as the representative had promised, effective tonight. To call me, my father had to walk across the street and knock on a neighbor's door and borrow a phone. Meredith woke up to something worse. When she opened her insurance app on borrowed Wi-Fi, there was a notice waiting. "Coverage update. Driver removed. You are currently uninsured." And a second one from the lender, informing her that the auto loan was now her responsibility to assume, and that the vehicle was titled to me. She was standing next to a car she couldn't legally drive that her sister owned, with a 5-year-old who needed to get to daycare, and a shift she needed to make. She told me later how that morning went. She'd stood in the driveway with Dylan's backpack in one hand and her dead phone in the other, doing the same math I'd done the night before, except in reverse. No insurance meant she couldn't drive. No working phone meant she couldn't call her manager. No card that worked meant she couldn't even order a ride. Every safety net she'd never known she had turned out to have my name stitched into the corner of it, and every one of them had vanished at the same time. Snorts in the end, she walked Dylan the mile to daycare and showed up to work an hour late on foot. And for the first time in her life, there was no one left to call. My mother went out to the coffee shop she liked, the one where the girl behind the counter knew her by name, and when she tried to pay with the household card that had always just worked, the machine spat it back. "Ma'am, the card's coming back inactive," the cashier said, glancing at the line building behind her. "Do you have another?" She didn't. She left her coffee on the counter and drove home with her hands shaking. And back at the house, my parents opened their laptop and found the rest of it. Not dramatic shutoffs. The lights were still on. The water still ran. Something quieter and more devastating. Every auto pay I had quietly carried for years now showed the same status. Payer removed. Payer removed. Payer removed. The utilities, the internet, the gap in the rent. For the first time in their lives, they were reading the invisible bill I had been paying item by item and understanding that a hand had been holding all of it up and the hand had let go. My father called me on the neighbor's phone at 8:20. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered. "Alicia," he said, and his voice was not the voice from the kitchen table. It was smaller. "The phones are down, everything's down." "What did you do?" I was calm. I had been calm since the soap dried on my wrist. "I didn't take anything from you," I said. "I just stopped paying for a family that isn't mine to carry." There was a silence on the line that went on longer than any argument could have. I could hear him breathing, trying to find the shape of a response and not finding one. The man who had told me the night before that every dollar I earned was his had just discovered how many of his own dollars had actually been mine. "That's not Alicia. You can't just I can, though," I said. "That's the part you never understood. It was all in my name, all of it. Every line, every payment, every account. I never took a thing from you. I just took my name off my own life. I hung up. I thought that would be the hard part. I was wrong." Around noon, a car pulled into my driveway. My mother was driving because Meredith couldn't. My father was in the passenger seat, his jaw set. And then the back door opened and my stomach dropped because they had brought Dylan. They walked him up to my door and pushed him gently out in front of them. A 5-year-old holding a stuffed dinosaur like a card they were laying on the table. "Are you really going to do this?" my mother said. "In front of your nephew?" I looked at Dylan, who had no idea he was being used, and I felt a rage so cold and so quiet it frightened me. But I didn't let him see it. I crouched down to his level, told him I had cartoons inside, and walked him to the living room and got him settled with a blanket. Snorts, then I came back and closed the door between the child and the adults who had brought him as leverage. You will not use him like that, I said, not with me. My mother's face rearranged itself into hurt. My father tried the voice again, the one that used to end conversations. This has gone far enough. You've made your point. Now put things back. You want to talk about what I owe, I said. Let's talk about what I've already paid. And I went and got the notebook. I think they understood what it was until I opened it on the table and turned it to face them. Years of my own handwriting. Every line, every payment, every quiet gap I'd closed while they told me I wouldn't even miss it. I read them the total, more than $140,000. My father went silent. He actually went silent staring at that number. And for 1 second I saw something move behind his eyes that might have been the beginning of understanding. My mother recovered first. She always did. You can't just add all that up like a bill, she said. That's not what family does. He never asked you to keep score, so I took out my phone and I showed her who had actually been keeping score. I scrolled back through years of text messages and I read them out loud in her own words. Just put it on yours, sweetheart. You're the only one who can, message after message. Put it on yours, cover it this once. You're the only one who can. The manipulation had never been a secret. It was written down in her own hand, sent from her own phone. It wasn't a mistake or a misunderstanding. It was a system, and I had a screenshot of every part of it. My mother stopped talking, and then my father said the thing that changed the whole story for me. He was still looking at the notebook, and when he spoke, his voice cracked in a way I had never heard from him. I did this for my parents, too, he said. For years, nobody thanked me either. That's just what the strong one does. The strong one. I stood very still, because in that instant, I understood something I should have seen my whole life. My father wasn't a monster. He was a man running a program that had been installed in him a long time ago by someone before him, and he had spent my whole life installing it in me. And I suddenly knew exactly who the first strong one had been. Before I tell you what I did next, be honest with me. If it were your sister, genuinely stuck with her little boy in the backseat, would you have held the line or saved her one more time? Tell me in the comments. Then stay with me, because what happened next was the hardest part. That night I picked up the funeral program from my nightstand and I called Aunt Lorraine. She answered on the third ring, and when I said my name, she wasn't surprised. There was a long, warm silence, and then she said something that made the hair on my arms stand up. It took them longer to get to you than I expected, she said. I'm sorry it got to you at all. I asked her what she meant. You're not the first, Alicia, she said. You're the second. And then my aunt told me the story my family had spent 40 years rewriting. Lorraine was the older sister, the responsible one, the one who could handle things. When she was young, back in the 80s and 90s, it was her parents, my grandparents, who ran the same play. She was the strong one, and my father was the favored one, the golden boy. And everything Lorraine earned was treated as family property. She paid, and she paid, and she carried them exactly the way I had for years, waiting to finally be seen. She told me about a Christmas in 1989 when she handed over the entire bonus. She'd saved all year so that my father, her little brother, could put a down payment on his first car. She told me how she'd sat at the same kind of kitchen table. I'd just walked away from being told the very thing I'd been told, that the strong one gives and the family takes, and that's simply what love looks like. She told me about the year she finally said no, and how the phone calls stopped, and how the photographs got edited, and how a living woman can be turned into a ghost story told to keep the next daughter in line. For a long time, I wondered if I'd done something monstrous, she said. It took me years to understand that the only monstrous thing I ever did was survive without them. I sat in the dark and listened, and I heard my own future in every sentence, and for the first time it didn't sound like a warning. It sounded like a door. And when she finally stopped, when she finally took her own name off her own life, the family did what families like ours do. They didn't call her brave. They called her selfish. They cut her out of the photos and told the children she had turned her back on all of us. They didn't hate me for leaving, Lorraine told me, and her voice was steady in a way that took decades to earn. They hated me for proving they could survive without bleeding me. That's the part they could never forgive. I thought about the photo on the mantle with the edge cut out of it. I thought about my father's warning repeated my whole childhood. Don't end up like Lorraine. And I understood finally that the woman I'd been taught to fear becoming was the only person in my family who had ever gotten free. She didn't tell me what to do. That's what I'll always be grateful for. She didn't give me a speech. She just told me how she had lived on the other side of it. You can be the villain in their story, she said, or the person in your own. You can't be both. I made my choice a long time ago, and it cost me a family I was never really in. But I've been able to breathe for 40 years. She paused. You get to decide what it costs you. When we hung up, the sun was starting to come up outside my window. I sat there a long time. Then I took the spiral notebook off my desk, and for the first time I closed it. Not to write another line, to stop counting. I wish I could tell you that was the end. It wasn't. The people who take from you don't stop just because you've seen them clearly. The messages started the next day, once my parents got their phones working again on their own new account. My mother's came in first, long and wounded. I never thought I raised a daughter who'd abandon her own blood, she wrote. Abandon. The exact word they'd used for Lorraine. I read it and I actually laughed, quietly, alone in my apartment. Because now I knew exactly what that word meant when my family used it. It didn't mean I had left. It meant I had stopped bleeding. Then Meredith called. And this one was harder because this one was real. She wasn't arrogant this time. She was scared. She was uninsured. She couldn't drive the car. She was about to miss a third shift. And if she missed it, she was going to lose the job. And if she lost the job, she didn't know how she was going to keep Dylan in daycare. I could hear him in the background, and I could hear that she'd been crying. I know I don't deserve to ask, she said, but I'm going to lose everything, Alicia. Here is where the old me would have folded. The old me had a 30-year reflex, and every cell in my body wanted to fix it, to the fear stop, to be needed one more time. I sat with the phone against my ear, and I let the silence stretch. And in that silence, I made the hardest decision of my life. I'm not going to save you again, I said, but I'm not going to punish Dylan for what the adults did either. I told her I would pick Dylan up from daycare that week myself because none of this was his fault. And then I told her the rest. I wasn't going to pay her debts. I wasn't going to put the car back in my name. But if she wanted, I would sit down with her that night and help her apply for her own insurance and start her own refinance in her own name for the first time in her life. I won't carry you again, I said, but I'll sit next to you while you learn to carry yourself. She was quiet for a long moment, and then she said something she had never once said to me in 31 years. She said, I'm sorry. I didn't know whether to believe her. That's the honest truth. I didn't rush to forgive her, and I didn't pretend one apology undid a lifetime. But I sat with her that night at her kitchen table, and we filled out the forms together. And she made a small, shameful human face when she saw what her own insurance would actually cost without me quietly absorbing it. She didn't transform. People don't. Not that fast. But she started. I kept my word about Dylan, too. That Wednesday, I picked him up from daycare myself, buckled him into the back of my car, and gave him the kind of afternoon a 5-year-old thinks is the entire point of being alive. A park, a shared order of fries, a long and very serious conversation about dinosaurs that I lost. He had no idea he'd been used as a bargaining chip on my doorstep 2 days earlier. He just held my hand across the parking lot and informed me that I was his favorite aunt, and I decided right there that whatever happened between me and the adults, this small person was not going to inherit the war. Loving him was easy. It always had been. He never once handed me a bill. That, I was learning, was what love without a price tag actually felt like. And I was 34 years old before I got a clean look at it. My parents took longer to understand what had actually happened to them. And when they did, it wasn't the $54,000 that broke them. It was the $1,900 a month. My father left me a voicemail a few days later. And I could hear in it the sound of a man doing arithmetic he didn't want to do. We didn't realize how much you. He started and started again. How much of it was you? That was as close as he could get to it. They had reached into my savings thinking they were taking the most valuable thing I had, and in doing so, they had cut off the quiet river of money that had been keeping their whole life afloat. They took the lump sum and killed the thing that actually mattered. They had, without understanding it, ended themselves. For a few days, my parents tried on a version of themselves I had never seen. My mother called, on their own phone plan now, and offered in a tight, careful voice to work out a schedule to pay me back. My father got on the line and proposed that I keep covering just the phone and the insurance, to be reasonable, as if we were negotiating a lease. It was the closest they had ever come to admitting the money was mine, and even then they couldn't say it plainly. They weren't sorry. They were adjusting. They had run the same play for so long that when it finally stopped working, their first instinct wasn't to stop. It was to renegotiate the terms. I said no. Not cruelly, just clearly. I'm not carrying any of it anymore, I told them. Not one line. And when he understood that, my father stopped asking and started threatening. I'll tell every single person in this family what you did to us, he said the next time we spoke. He meant it as his trump card. He was going to do to me what they'd done to Lorraine. Call every aunt and cousin, tell them Alicia had abandoned her aging parents, and make me the villain in the family story. For a second, the old fear rose up, and then it didn't. Go ahead, I said, but tell them the whole thing, or I will. He didn't know what to do with that. He was used to controlling the story. He had never once considered that the story might not survive being told all the way through. That same evening, a text came in from a number I barely used. My mother's cousin Carol, the one who'd squeezed my arm at the reunion. Honey, she wrote, we all wondered how your parents always managed. Now we know, call me. My father thought he held the family's opinion in his hand. He had no idea it had already started to turn. He made his calls, I'll give him that. He actually did it. He called around the family and told them his version, that his ungrateful daughter had cut off her struggling parents out of spite. But a strange thing happens when you tell people a story that doesn't add up. They start asking questions, because the family had always quietly wondered how my parents, on a warehouse pension and not much else, had managed to keep their apartment and keep 2 phones and keep the lights on all these years. And now, with my father complaining that I'd cut them off, the answer arrived on its own. If cutting Alicia off was what left them short, then Alicia had been the one holding them up the entire time. Carol told me later how it went. My father called one of my cousins expecting sympathy, and my cousin said slowly, wait, Alicia's been covering your rent for years. And there was no good answer to that, because the true answer was yes. Carol walked me through the rest of it over the phone, the calls landing one after another. An uncle who remembered my mother once bragging that Alicia takes care of everything, now hearing that same sentence in a completely different key. A cousin who had assumed all these years that my parents were simply careful with money, realizing that careful had a name and the name was mine. Nobody threw a party. It was quieter and sadder than that. It was a whole family slowly turning a picture around to look at the back of it and finding a signature they should have recognized a long time ago. The story my father tried to tell about me collapsed under the weight of the thing he was trying to hide. And in the middle of that collapse, something I never expected happened. The family started to remember Lorraine because it was the same story. The responsible daughter, drained for years, blamed the moment she stopped. When the aunts and cousins put my situation next to hers, 40 years apart, the pattern was impossible to miss. People who had spent decades believing Lorraine turned her back on the family suddenly understood what had actually been done to her. I called her and told her my aunt, who had carried the family's version of herself for 4 decades, was quiet on the line for a long time. 40 years, she finally said. It only took the truth about you to give me mine back. I asked her if she was angry at me, at the timing, at how long it had all taken to come out. She said no. She said the strangest gift of getting older was watching a truth you'd carried alone finally become something other people could see for themselves. Then she asked me a question I wasn't ready for. She asked whether I would be all right, really all right without the family I'd spent my whole life trying to earn my way into. I told her the truth. I told her I didn't know yet. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said that was the most honest answer anyone in our family had given in 40 years, and that I would be fine. Not because I was the strong one, because I had finally stopped auditioning to be loved. Someone took the old photo down off the mantle. My cousin offered to have the missing piece restored, to put Lorraine back in the frame she'd been cut out of. 2 load-bearing walls, a generation apart, finally standing next to each other instead of alone. Here's the part I'm proudest of, and it's not the part you might think. I never stood up in front of the family and destroyed my parents. I could have. I had the notebook, the texts, the whole receipt of everything they'd taken. I could have read it all out and let them drown in it. I didn't. When the family asked me what happened, I told them the truth, plainly, and then I stopped. I didn't decorate it. I didn't twist the knife. I'm not here to humiliate them. I told Carol when she asked if I wanted her to spread the whole story. I'm just done paying to be their daughter. The consequences my parents faced were not consequences I created. They were consequences they'd built themselves over 30 years and simply never had to feel because I'd been standing under all of it. All I did was step out from under the weight. Everything that fell because they'd stacked it there. The last time we spoke about it directly, my parents asked in the wounded, negotiating way people do when they've lost whether things could go back to normal. I told them the truth. "The door isn't locked," I said, "but you don't get a key just for sharing my last name. If you want a relationship with me, it starts with you telling the truth about what you did out loud, and it never ever includes my accounts again." That was the condition. I closed the joint savings account that same week. The one my mother's name had been sitting on since 2009, and opened a new one in my name only. I went into the branch in person to do it. The banker who helped me was kind, and a little puzzled the way they get when someone closes an account that's been open since before smartphones existed. She asked if everything was all right in the careful way they're trained to, and I told her it was that I was just taking a name off something that should have come off a long time ago. She slid the paperwork across the counter, and I thought about how many things had been slid across tables at me lately, and how this was the first one I got to sign entirely on my own terms. I signed it. The door they'd walked through was welded shut. Not out of revenge, just because some doors should never have been left open in the first place. My father didn't apologize, not really. My mother sent a message that was almost one and then took most of it back in the same paragraph. That was okay. I had finally stopped needing their apology in order to be all right. They understood in the end that they had told the whole family the one thing they most wanted to hide, and there was no taking it back. It's been a few weeks now. It's the end of May, and I want to tell you what my life actually looks like on the other side of this, because the money was never really the point. For the first time in 7 years, I looked at my own bank account at the end of the month, and there was no river of $1,900 flowing out of it. My paycheck was mine, all of it. I sat there looking at the number, and the relief hit me so hard it felt like taking a full breath after years of shallow ones. I hadn't realized how long I'd been holding it. I did one small thing with the first month that was fully mine. I painted my bedroom. It had been the same tired beige since I moved in because repainting had always felt like a luxury I couldn't justify while I was quietly funding 4 other lives. I picked a color I actually loved, a deep, quiet green. And I spent a whole Saturday doing it myself with the windows open. It's a silly thing to be proud of, a painted room, but every time I walk into it now, it reminds me that the space is mine, that I chose it, and that no one is going to reach into it and take it while I'm not looking. There were other small things. I stopped saying yes to overtime I didn't want. I booked a weekend away by myself, just to prove I could spend money on my own life without asking permission or waiting for the guilt to arrive. None of it was dramatic. That's what I want you to understand. Getting free didn't look like a courtroom or a screaming match. It looked like a green bedroom and a full paycheck and a Saturday that belonged to me. The revenge people imagine in stories like this never came because I never actually wanted it. I only wanted my life back, and I took it one quiet decision at a time. I had dinner last week with Aunt Lorraine and my friend Renee. 3 plates on the table, real laughter, no hidden bill under any of it, no one keeping score. At one point, Renee looked at me across the table and said, "You look different, lighter, like you finally stopped carrying the house." And she was right. That's exactly what it felt like. Like I'd been carrying a house on my back for so long I'd forgotten it wasn't part of my body. I found out something at that too. A family that adds up your worth in dollars was never really a family. It just wore the word like a costume so it could keep the receipts coming. Meredith and I are somewhere careful and unfinished. She made the car payment herself this month. The loan still working its way into her name, but she made the payment and she texted me a picture of the confirmation. "Made the car payment myself this month," she wrote. "First time, thank you for not saving me." I smiled at that. And then I put my phone down and I did not open my wallet. That's the difference now. I can love my sister and still let her stand on her own feet. Those 2 things were never actually opposites. My family just needed me to believe they were. Here is the twist I never saw coming, the one that reframed all of it. For 30 years, I had confused being needed with being loved. I had built my whole sense of worth out of how useful I was, how much I could carry, how indispensable I could make myself. And I had been so afraid of what would happen if I ever put it down. What actually happened when I put it down was this. I got my life back. They didn't take my savings. Not really. They freed me from a job I never applied for. The job of holding up people who were never going to hold me up in return. The spiral notebook is in a drawer now. I didn't tear it up. I didn't burn it in some dramatic gesture. I just closed it and put it away because I don't need it anymore. I'm not keeping score. There's nothing left to count. If any part of this reached you, share it with the one person in your life who needs to hear that being needed is not the same as being loved. And if you want more stories about people who finally stopped paying to belong, take a second to like and subscribe. There's one last thing. The story started with my parents at 8:00 in the morning reaching for phones that wouldn't reach me. It ends with a phone, too. Last night, mine sat quiet on the table, and for once, the quiet didn't feel like being forgotten. It felt like peace. And then I picked it up. And I made the one call I actually wanted to make. I called my Aunt Lorraine, the bravest person my family ever produced, the first wall to walk out from under the weight. "It got bad, Aunt Lorraine," I told her. So I finally called. She laughed, soft and warm, and we talked for an hour about nothing at all. My phone is quiet now, and for the first time in my life, so am I.